Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gettin Buzz'd. I'm Dustin, CEO and founder of HIVE Digital Strategy. With me as always is Michael Thebeau, our business development manager. We're gonna do the guns?
Finger guns.
Finger guns, okay. And today we've actually got a remote guest. We're very excited to have Jeremy Miller on with us. Jeremy is from Sticky Branding and he's got a brand new book coming out. I guess, that was a little bit of a pun. Called Brand New Name. It comes out next month, and today we're going to be talking all about branding and naming, and also like rebranding and renaming, right? So we're excited to have Jeremy on. But first, the most important piece is we're drinking something local, but it's not local for us this time. So it's local for Jeremy. Jeremy's up in Ontario, Canada, and so we're doing some Canadian beer today. We got Molson. I don't think it gets much more Canadian than having the leaf on the front. So, yeah,
I can't recall ever having Molson before. Obviously, I know the name, but for any Canadians that may be watching this, Jeremy said you have to drink it. It's the best beer you'll ever have.
I'm already gonna get shot.
Right. I'm just completely throwing one under the bus. He didn't say that. But cheers. We're excited to have you on, Jeremy.
Cheers.
Well, great. And so, like I mentioned, Jeremy is with Sticky Branding and has his book coming out next month called Brand New Name. Jeremy, do you want to kind of dive in and give us a little bit of background on you and the book, and what led you down this kind of branding path?
Sure. So I have a non-traditional path into branding. Where I am today is I am the president and founder of Sticky Branding, which is a brand building agency, and we help companies grow sticky brands. And we do that through books and consulting and other forms of services that really are going into the strategic end of how do you grow your business and brand to the next level. But my path and my entry into this point was very non-traditional. I started out actually in a family business, and it was in the recruiting industry. In the early 2000s, recruiting got disrupted by Facebook and Google and technology, and it was at the very sharp end of the spear in terms of companies that got their business models transformed based on what the internet was going to do. Now, at the time, we didn't know this. We thought we had a branding problem, or actually, thought we had a sales problem because our customers just weren't buying. And so we started studying our customers and studying our market. And what we discovered was we had a branding problem. Our customers couldn't distinguish us from anyone else. Now, I was the director of sales. I was a sales guy who had lost his competitive advantage. So I was forced to try and reinvent this business, but I really didn't know much about branding. So I actually started reading everything I could get my hands on, all the books that you would expect. And the thing that was so frustrating at the time was all those books were about big companies like Apple and Nike and Starbucks. And I was a small business. I had a marketing budget, but not a vast one. We had a small sales team, a small marketing team, and we could do stuff, but we weren't going to run campaigns on the Super Bowl or really even buy any kind of ads.
Sure.
And so we had to take the ideas that we were learning and apply them. And that's exactly what we did. We adopted digital marketing very early as late 2004. We were getting into search engine optimization, content marketing, some social media marketing. And what happened in my path into branding was my clients took notice of the work we were doing on our business, and they started asking for help. And so when I went to sell my family's business a few years later, I spun off that consulting practice that had come out of client requests, and that became Sticky Branding, and then I packaged and sold the family business.
That's awesome. And you mentioned you had kind of dived into digital marketing in 2004, which doesn't sound like that long ago, but from a digital perspective, that's like ancient times.
Yeah.
And it's I'd be interested to hear kind of how things have changed since then for you. Obviously there's been a whole lot of growth kind of in the digital space in the last 15 years.
It's almost a different world. Go back in time. So the Google algorithm at that time was actually looking at URLs. So you would see companies name themselves, say where I'm based, Toronto, the TorontoAccountingFirm.com, and they would be doing SEO optimization right into the company names. And so there's this generation for about 5 years that created these terrible descriptive names, just
Right.
like they were positioning themselves on the yellow pages. And so there was that. But you look at things like Facebook, that like blogging was just coming into its own, and this is like when Seth Godin was actually starting as a blogger, was around 2002, and there wasn't anyone doing it. So you create these massive followings because the few people that were pioneering were really anomalies. Today,
Right.
the issue is we're dealing with content shock, where I think it's actually the opposite extreme, where it is a race for the bottom, where everybody is producing so much content that the chance of being seen is like, you have to be like Gary Vaynerchuk and be thinking of, how do I post maybe 5, 10, in his case, 100 pieces of content per platform per day just to get noticed, because, oh wait, everybody has tuned out because the volume is so high.
Right. Well, and I think that's interesting, and I think it leads in really well to kind of our topic today of branding, or rebranding. Um, you mentioned, like, at that time, in the early 2000s, when kind of all of this stuff kind of started, we had so many. I mean, especially in Colorado, we saw it a ton of, everybody's named something Colorado, right? They're the Colorado accountants, they're the whatever, and we saw that kind of globally. Um, I I can imagine that a lot of that has really started to change, and people have really started to think about, well, that was kind of a terrible name. Like, how do I start to rebrand? How do I make that shift? So talk to us a little bit about kind of your philosophy in branding or rebranding, and how that's kind of impacting businesses today.
Sure. Well, if you think of your brand in the wrapping paper sense, it's how you're presenting yourself to the world. Now, for me, when I think of branding, I actually think of it as strategies. Branding is that thing of, how do you want to position your brand in terms of where do you play, how do you win, how do you want to be known, and then how do you build all that infrastructure, that organizational capacity to serve whatever you're trying to do. And it's big questions. It's that intersection between marketing, sales, and operations, because the reality is, if you think of it in just restaurant terms, you can see these restaurants that launch with beautiful decor, great location, great name, great sign, everything else, and it's a huge launch, and then you get food poisoning and you never go back.
Right.
So what's the brand in that case? Was it all that marketing hype, or was it the customer experience? So for me, sticky branding is really the idea of, how do you get a first choice advantage? How do you get your customers to know you, like you, trust you, so they ultimately choose you first? And to me, that's what it takes to create a sticky brand, and it's going to be multifaceted. Now, to go back to where your question is, in terms of the marketing, if your name, if your website, if your packaging is not working, it's creating dissonance, your customers don't get it, you've got a name that is, say, called A1 or something like that, it just doesn't resonate anymore,
Yeah.
change it. Your brand is a constructed thing to help you sell things.
Right.
So if it's not working, change. And so if you've got, actually a very specific example, a client of mine was called A1 Shipping Supplies. They were a second generation family business. Obviously, it was named for the yellow pages.
Yep.
35 years later, it was an embarrassment. So there's 4 brothers that run the company. They have a sales force of roughly 10 guys, and the sales guys would walk into large food manufacturing companies, and they wouldn't be taken seriously. Now, this is a sizable business. They do big deals. An average size sale could be upwards of $1 million a year in terms of the volumes that they're doing, but their business card says A1, and you're like, are you really a business? So in that case, when the brand is working against you, change it. So we took them through the brand new naming process, which is a model of using your employees to actually rename something.
Interesting.
And they came up with Rocket Line. And the idea behind that was, they were inspired by the Pep Boys, the auto parts one, with the company with the 3 founders in the logo. Well, 4 brothers, they wanted something that was whimsical. They wanted to stand out from Uline and Unisource and Crawford and all those kind of like stodgy industrial businesses. And so they chose this whimsical brand that now when they walk in, the conversation's not, are you for real? It's, oh, that's interesting. What can you do for me?
Right. And so how do you kind of combat the fear of, oh, hey, we've had this name for 30 years, or even being afraid of like, hey, am I going to lose all of my SEO progress or recognition by rebranding?
Well, from an SEO perspective, that's straightforward. That's why they need an agency like yours, or working with a partner. All you're really doing is telling Google with a redirect that, oh wait, the domain now is XYZ.
Right.
So that, from an SEO perspective, hire a professional and don't screw up. That's the easy answer there. But from a communication perspective, the way to think of it is your name is a vessel. It contains all the meaning, all the history, all the experiences. So we're talking about, say, Molson Canadian. In Colorado, that probably doesn't have the same volume of experiences that, say, it does for me here in Canada. Like, we've grown up with this as being the hockey beer, and it's basically, you've got it on every ad campaign ever. It's the equivalent of, say, Coors or Bud. It's that kind of advertising volume. So there's all that history. So when you've got that legacy, and you've got a new name, the question is, how do you pour the contents from one vessel to the other? And that's a communication strategy, and it takes time. The longer your brand has been around, the more times you have to go back to those customers and say, oh, by the way, just so you know, our name is now this, and we changed it because, and just, it's that conditioning so that they finally go, okay, I got it. This is who these guys are.
Sure. Well, I think it's interesting that kind of businesses go through cycles, right? Like when you're first starting up, you're just kind of, most are probably just kind of running with, oh, that's a cute name, that's a little bit catchy, whatever. And like in our experience, like we had to grow up, right? Like our original name was Be Social, so it's BEE, and we were supposed to be, a social media firm, and immediately, 6 months after launching the business, we kind of realized that this doesn't really fit for what we're trying to do. When we started to get to the point where, we're really trying to work with, mid and enterprise level kind of businesses, like walking in and saying, hey, I'm Dustin with Be Social. They're like, so you just do social? Like, and it was this point of like, oh, like our brand's got to grow up with us. And so that's what kind of sparked our rebrand. And so I think all of that, it can be very stressful for a business owner, right? Like you've had this business, you've grown this business with that name, and now we're going to scrap that and go with something new. Do you ever see like those kind of like fear markers come out, or the, this is like you're killing someone's baby essentially?
Sure. It's highly personal, especially if the business has been around for a while. And people get so caught up on logos, and it's got to be consistent, and our colors are got to be consistent, and all that kind of stuff. But that's actually marketing from a previous generation. Like that was what we had to do from a print land. In digital, it's not the same kind of criteria. Yeah, your color matters, but like, does it? Like, it's like you can't even dictate the color consistency across devices. So yeah, it's personal. To me, I think the big thing, and this business owner to business owner, the part that gets me going is it's expensive. And it's like doing a home renovation. You think you're going to be doing your kitchen, the next thing you know, like, oh wait, this is now the living room, and oh wait, now I'm doing this and this, and like what started as what you thought was a $20,000 project, $100,000 project, and you're just like, this is consuming so much time.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. So it's so the problem is, when you start, you can't stop. But the reality is, and I think this is where entrepreneurs and business owners and marketers come to, when this name, or when this brand, or when what we are doing is actually preventing us from getting where we want to go, the choice is easy. Like, like in Be Social, you saw you couldn't achieve your objectives with the way you were positioned in the market. So you had to change yourself.
Right.
And the benefit of being a young company is you could do that. So you could make the change. It's relatively painless, and you could maintain the B identity and elements that you've had. But you're evolving, and that's what brands are. I think the hang up we have on branding right now is we think a brand is static, and it's not. A brand is largely based on what you have done. It's based on how other people have experienced you in the past. but branding is forward looking. What are you going to do next? So when you're choosing a name, when you're choosing a brand identity, it's not for where you are right now, it's where you want to be, say 3 or 5 years from now.
Now, I feel like, most of this conversation has been for the business that's going to rebrand, that needs kind of that shift. What do you suggest for kind of that new entrepreneur, that new business? How do they test before they go to market? Hey, what is going to stick? What is going to land with the customers that I want it to land with?
Sure.
What are kind of some of your top tips for that new business?
So in my new book, Brand New Name, what we provide is a 3-stage naming sprint. So we show you everything you need to do to name something. So the first thing is strategy. What are you naming? Why is it important? How is it going to stand out in the market? And here's a set of exercises on how to do that. Stage 2 is a creative naming sprint. So we give you exercises to generate tons of ideas over the course of 5 days. And then the third stage, it's testing and selection. And so when we're talking naming specifically, it is pretty nuanced because it's more than just testing, does this resonate in the market? It's also testing to see, can I actually get this name? And that's the big problem we have right now with naming, is that we're dealing with a naming drought. That you think of it, all the .coms, all the 3-character .coms disappeared in what, 1997?
Right.
All the 4-character .coms were taken up by the end of 2002. It's not long until all the 5-character .coms are gone. But within that, all the good .coms are gone. Like every proper noun is taken. So the frustration that we face when we go to name something is we find out it's already taken. And not only is the domain taken, we are dealing with trademark issues. And what gets so frustrating, especially for a small business, is that firm that has the same domain as you probably will never be your competitor. You're based in Colorado, I'm based here in Toronto. We could both be doing the exact same services and never cross paths. But because of the internet, because of Google, we now have to be conscientious of each other. That didn't happen 2 generations ago, or even a generation ago. So we're dealing with this issue now where domains are being taken, trademarks are being taken. And so in your testing, you have to not only be able to find something that resonates, it's something that's available. So we show you how to do the high level search in terms of how do you eliminate the non-starters. But the way to test if it resonates or not is to actually get in front of customers, is to just as you found out when you were doing Be Social, it was in the sales process, it was in the talking to people that you identified a problem. So in your launch stages, my recommendation to all entrepreneurs is always the same. Get this thing in front of real prospects, real users, real clients, and see what they think. Because the sooner you can get this in front of people, A, it's going to help you sell, but B, it's going to let you know if there's a problem.
So do you think it's as easy as, so if you're a brand new startup, you're trying to figure out what your brand name is, maybe you don't even have clients or customers yet, do you think it's as easy as just kind of reaching out to those prospects and saying, hey, what do you think of these names?
Yeah, exactly. So in the book, we actually show you 3 market tests. One's called the Helvetica Test, one's the logo test, and the third is the recall test. So the Helvetica test is really simple. All you do is you say you have a short list of 3 names. Go and print them on, say, 72-point Helvetica, all caps on a piece of paper. And you get the 3 pieces of paper and say we're meeting face to face. And I said, okay, guys, which of these, we're looking at some names. Which one is your favorite? Which one resonates the most with you? And I'll present them to you and I'll just watch you, see how you thumb through it. And I'll ask you just hand back the sheet of the name that you like the best. Now, I might ask you a couple questions to see why you chose that name, but I'm really just seeing how you respond to it. And it's important when you do this not to actually try and say, well, I really like this one or that. You just want to see which one has highest preference. So that gives you an idea of how does someone interact with the name and which one do they like the best. Now, I then repeat the process. I will go on to say Looka, which used to be called LogoJoy, which is a simple AI tool for creating logos. It's like $45. You can even do a little bit less. And go and take those 3 names or the names you want to test and create sample logos for them. And what that does is allow you to see how someone might interact with a visual identity. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a prototype. It's just to see how someone interacts. Again, put them on a sheet, pass them out. Which one do you like? Now, what's interesting in these 2 tests is you get insights you may not expect. So, for example, Lululemon, when they were naming the brand, what they did is they had 25 names, and they did the same kind of testing. And what's interesting is that A symbol on the Lululemon logo. It looks like a wig almost. That actually came from another brand name called Athletica. And so they took the symbol that they loved there and they put it to the name that resonated the most. So you never know what you're going to discover. And then the third test is what you do is you log whoever you were talking to. Say you showed the names to 10 people. 5 days later, you call up those individuals and say, hey, it's Jeremy calling from Sticky Brand. You remember those names we were looking at? Yeah. Can you remind me which one was your favorite? And that gives you a recall. And now you're able to see, okay, which ones resonated the most in the point, and now which ones have the highest stickiness. Now, those data points aren't necessarily going to tell you which name to choose, but they're going to give you some insights that will complement what you actually know and feel about the names and what you're testing and what fits your strategy. And so sometimes you're going to see a name that just is, you want it and it resonates really well and just reinforces it. Other times you're going to get insights that confuse you, but at least you're getting some data so that you can make a rational decision.
At the very least, you're able to like kill off a couple ideas, right?
For sure. Yeah, and that's
No,
really what we're trying to do, is eliminate this down to something you can choose. But
Right.
often, like there's two extremes that happen in naming. There's going to be the name that you get and you love it and it's just there, or there's the other ones that you've got to work at. And so in the times that you're working at, having the extra data can be helpful. It also can confuse you because you get customers that are telling you stuff, and it's like that old phrase, like your grandparents would, or your grandpa would say, is opinions are like a-holes. Everyone's got one. They all tend to stink. Uh, like you got to filter this stuff too.
Now with that, I mean, I see this working really well for a company who's maybe rebranding, who's got great rapport with some of their clients and stuff like that.
Sure.
For an up and coming business, it feels almost as if it's kind of a touchy subject, where if you're going to potential clients or clients that you've only been with for months or something like that, does it seem like a weird dynamic where, hey, this conversation is about you? You know, aren't we your client? Aren't you supposed to be invested in us? Or does that then kind of turn around to like, hey, I care about you as a client. I care, like you almost feel invested as a client in their branding and their logo or their color, whatever it might be.
Well, I think there's two parts to your question, Michael. So the first one is, should you bring it? Like, do you have enough people to bring it to?
Right.
I think this is a golden opportunity for sales. Like, if you
Yeah.
don't go and blow your own horn, nobody will. If you're not willing to get in front of clients and ask them for their opinion on the safest thing ever of what should I call myself,
Yeah.
actually asking them for money is going to suck. So nut up and go and do this. It would be my
Yeah.
first thing. If you can't get on that, then maybe entrepreneurship's not a good path for you.
Sure.
So
Fair.
this is an opportunity to actually go and talk to people, tell your story, and often it generates leads. So that's the benefit of it. Now, will this be a risk? Actually, no. I think it goes to what you're saying. I think people actually want to be reciprocal. They want to help. And if
Mhm.
you ask them for their opinion, everybody likes to share that. They will often give you honest feedback and they feel participatory. But
Yeah.
it's more than just your customers, it's also your own employees. I think one of the problems that we have is we treat branding as something that is only for management or only for marketing. But I think everyone inside your organization has an opportunity to play with this. So if you're a startup and it's that you and your partner, or you have a couple interns working with you, getting everybody involved in these projects is actually the ideal for brand building, because now you're empowering not only your customers, but your team to have a stake in the development of what you're building.
I think that's a really great point because I think it is kind of a little bit of an old school, maybe more like the Mad Men kind of days, right? Where it was just like whoever owned the business or, that C level had a say in this, and all of the rest were just like, hey, you're just going to deal with whatever we decide. And so I think that's a really good point of like, get as many people involved as you can, like empower your team, empower your prospects. And do you even kind of recommend like asking friends and family?
Yeah. So if you're a small business or a startup, so what the way the naming sprint works is you can do it on your own, but it's ideal if you can get other people involved. And what we try to do is, I think it's a myth to think that you're going to be able to generate your best ideas in an hour. It takes time. Creativity is something you've got to work at. And so the way the naming sprint works is every day I give you an exercise and a challenge. And so here's some tools in order to create names. And your quota is 5 good names per person per day. So over the course of 5 days, if you do this on your own, you're going to generate 25 names. But if you can get, say, 10 people involved in this, now you've got 250 names, and you increase your odds of finding really great options. So if you were a solopreneur and starting out, then getting your spouse, getting your parents, getting your friends, maybe getting a partner involved in it isn't ideal. It's recruiting people that you think will contribute. And it's not a lot of time. It's anywhere from 20 minutes to 90 minutes a day to hit that quota. But often you will get your best ideas by including people, not just outsiders, including people that know you, know the business, know what you're trying to create, because they have a stake in it. And the more people you involve, the better. I did a project recently with a startup here in Toronto, and they had a trademark issue. They couldn't use their name in the United States, and that was a big problem for them. So they have 45 employees. Over the course of 5 days, they generated 639 names.
Wow.
They had a short list of 40. And they actually chose 2 of those names, one for the company and one for a future product, out of that creative sprint. So long story short, get people involved. The more people you involve in your creativity, the more options you're going to have.
Well, and everyone just feels part of, like they're part of it, like they're invested, right? I mean, I can imagine that we didn't do this when we branded, and so I wish I would have thought of that, of like, hey, I mean, at that time, like we had clients, like we had people that we could go to, and like just getting them to feel like they're part of it.
Right.
I think that just builds so much like loyalty, right? And kind of allegiance to the brand, right? You know, they're invested, like they helped decide that.
Yeah.
Mm. I had an epiphany as an agency owner a few years ago, where I was just burnt out and struggling. And I think the role of a consultant is we often feel like we have to prescribe the answer. And that was largely what was happening. But my frustration was I would go in and I'd work with a client, we'd do a strategy workshop, and I'd come back a year later and say, so how far have you gotten? And be like, I don't know, nothing. And it would kind of die in the vine. And what I ended up realizing, well, this is the dawn of what Brand New Name is largely based on, is this idea of employee co-creation. Inside every organization is just immense creative potential. The challenge is, how do we put process and structure so that we can provide people a path to use their ideas? And so I actually flipped my entire business model around to the idea of co-creation. How do we unlock the creative genius of teams to generate a name, to develop brand positioning, to solve any type of really hard, thorny business problem? And what I discovered in that is, one, it creates these culture shifts. You're empowering people to do really remarkable work inside the business. But as an agency owner, it gives me scale. Rather than having to have 5 full-time people doing research and analysis and all this work that I would have to do to complete a project, I can flip that work and actually have the client's employees do these projects. And so it's this win-win scenario where I can actually have greater impact without having to think that I own the outcome. And the client actually gets the better results because they own the outcome.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and I think it's so interesting because I think a lot of organizations kind of think of like their employees, they're here for this is their role. They, you know, and a lot of those roles aren't creative, right? They're not in that space, and they don't have that kind of job description. But I think it is interesting to me because I mean, we've seen it with clients that, you know, great ideas come from anywhere. And, you know, it doesn't matter if somebody's there to handle your bookkeeping, that person may end up having the perfect idea for your brand.
And isn't it funny that we would denigrate the person doing their bookkeeping, uh, because what do they do outside of work? Like they could be they could be a singer, they could be a dancer, they could be a painter, they actually could be an artist,
Okay.
and be more creative than anyone else in the organization. But their day job, the way they make a living to pay for their passion, is by being a bookkeeper.
Right.
Or and so we are born creative, but I think the problem I see with leaders today and leadership in general is that people are put into silos. We still have this Taylorist mentality of how we run and organize our organizations, and then compounded by that, we're so busy that we overlook the potential that resides inside of our organizations. And the sad reality is when we face a crisis, we don't look to our team to solve it. We call an agency, we can call a consultant, we call somebody else to give us an answer. It's not to say that that's wrong, but it's kind of a shame to think that if you had actually built up that potential inside your organization, imagine what that combined horsepower of agency plus staff would do. Because
Right.
now you're bringing in an outside perspective with specific capabilities and a problem solving organization with agility to execute.
Mhm.
Now a business can scale.
Yeah. Do you have any quick tips on how to kind of monitor your branding or something like that? You kind of going back to your original story of rebranding your family business. I mean, it feels like one of those things that if sales is dipping or something like that, the initial gut check reaction is Dustin's going to look at the salespeople,
Sure.
and then maybe at the marketing and where are we reaching these people. And it feels like branding would be very low on that list, especially for an established business. So, is there some way to kind of monitor or to check in on, hey, how is my branding doing? Is this something that was resonating 5 years ago that isn't resonating today?
Sure. Um, so your brand has a shelf life, and unfortunately, that shelf life is getting shorter and shorter. So right now, the average is anywhere from 3 to 7 years, and that's your value proposition and positioning. And so if you're in a say consumer electronics or fashion, you actually could be even shorter than that. Like it's longer windows. If you're in say real estate or industrial, it's on the longer end of this. But either way, your brand has a shelf life where you're going to have to constantly reinvent it. So the
Mhm.
canary in the coal mine is actually your website. So when your website is looking at a date, it's actually a pretty good indicator that there are other aspects of your brand that are probably out of date as well. So your website has a shelf life of anywhere from 3 to 5 years. When it's starting to look stale, the imagery's stale, the messaging stale, the services are stale, the call to actions are stale.
Yeah.
Well, that's that early warning sign that you probably have not only a website that's out of date, that's probably you're gonna have to look at your brand messaging, your go-to-market strategy, and everything else at the same time. Now, if you
Yeah.
get to the point where sales are flagging and you're saying we're hitting a plateau, or worse still, you're hitting dissonance and losing deals, well, then you probably ignored that canary in the coal mine and you're sitting there in the trough right now and you have to dig yourself out, rebuild credibility, and you're actually in a really ugly, hard position. So at that state, that those kind of rebrands are saying you were negligent. You allowed your business to get hurt in order because you weren't
Yeah.
willing to deal with the signs and the warnings that that were ringing loud in your ears.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Absolutely. And Jeremy, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you got a ton going on with your book release and everything next month. Could you kind of tell folks, how are they going to be able to get the book, all of those things?
Sure. So the book is called Brand New Name and it's available on October 8th. It's available wherever books are sold. So Amazon is the best place, of course. But if you can't find it, visit me at stickybranding.com and we'll have all the links and everything there for you.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, I think this has been very insightful. I think there's a lot that honestly the world still needs to understand about branding and rebranding. And so I
Sure.
think that, if we can even give, one business or one startup kind of some of these ideas, I think that we're better off for it. And so the last kind of piece to the podcast is how's the buzz? So like Michael said, like, we all know Molson here, but I mean, we're also in kind of a really big beer state.
Yeah.
So I had never actually had Molson.
I haven't seen you
Yeah.
take a sip of it yet, but I know for a fact that you've had Molson before.
I have.
You've
I have
got
not
one.
had this in a very long time, so I feel like I am going back to my college days and slumming it a little bit. I feel this is the sad part of so I've got Molson Canadian here, and I really should be drinking more of this, but we got a great microbrew scene here, but we can't ship it. Obviously, we're not shipping it to Colorado, so this is the equivalent of the Coors Light or Bud kind of beer. It's your session beer. It's that thing where you want a day drink and not bust your wallet. This is
Right.
this is good. But
You're
yeah,
going to the hockey game, you're going to drink a couple of these.
yeah, and they're going to sell them to you for like $18 a pint, so it's perfect.
And somehow you still have a couple of them.
Yeah, I think the worst is this baseball. So you go there and they cut you off with the seventh inning, and then you got like, oh crap, I don't fully have my buzz on, and now I'm getting sober and I have to keep watching this thing. I'm like, oh god.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to drink, obviously. Like I do compare it a little bit to kind of those.
I think it's a little more flavorful than like and I hope Colorado doesn't shoot me for this, but it's a little more flavorful than a Coors Light.
Sure.
But yeah, it is kind of that big beer feel that's not super craft or anything like that. And yeah, it feels like something you could just go and, have a couple of them during a sporting event or something.
Or we could just day drink at the office with Molson.
Yeah, we could just start a podcast in the morning and drink these for the rest of the day.
I like the way you think. Now we'll have to get you down here at some point, or I'll have to go your way, and we'll compare the craft scene because that's where it starts to get really interesting. And actually, my first book, I had the chance to profile one of the up and coming microbrews here in Ontario called Beau's Brewery. And they are so innovative. Like they come up with all their varying seasonals and everything like that. But it's amazing. It's a family business that has gone from, I don't know specifically their revenue, but let's say they've gone from like 0 to 50 million in less than a decade. Wow. And just kicking ass and taking names. And I think that's what's so fascinating when you look at just like the craft brand scene. Like this is like Coors or Molson or any of that kind of stuff. It's like the Heinz, Coca-Cola, big brands.
Right.
But the real cool marketing is coming out of the mid-market where we're seeing like challenger brands that are not only challenging on the product and the beer, but distribution models and everything else. And it's one of the most fascinating markets to watch.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting with some of those big brands is they even though they do have, untouchable marketing budgets and things like that, I think there's a tendency for some of them to get a little fat and happy, right? Like they
play safe.
Yeah, they've built their brand, they've built their market, things like that. And I think it's the smaller guys that are being innovative, and they're having to be much more strategic about, okay, how are we going to compete with the Molsons or the Coca-Colas or, whatever.
Mm-hmm. But their business models, like you look at it, so you got Molson Coors, which is the one giant, and then there's InBev, which is Labatt, and that's the South American brand. And so you've got these 2 or 3 giants that control the mega beer market. Right. But their business model is straightforward. They allow the microbrews to get up to a certain threshold, do all the innovation, and then they buy them. And then they maintain a house. If you look at all of these organizations now, they're a house of brands. Like the brand architecture of Molson Coors is fascinating. Yeah, they've got these stalwart mega brands, but at the same time, underneath that, where they're making the highest growth market is on the acquisition and development of these smaller house of brand beers, and each one's allowed to own and keep their own regional marketing and their own flavor, and they kind of allow them to appear local when they're not.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Absolutely. Well, Jeremy, again, thank you for joining us. I think it was very informative and such a deep topic that I think that there's still so much more to dive into. We'll have links down below, how to get in touch with Jeremy, how to order the book. As soon as that is up on Amazon and things like that, we'll have it updated so that you can one click, go buy that book. Definitely recommend it. And so we'll have another episode next week. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.